So there are other ways we can emit particles. We can emit from an object, and I need some kind of object here. Perhaps I'll use a plane. Let me scale this plane up. And then I can say particles and emit from object. So the default here is we have a kind of omni emission that's happening from these particles at each vertex point of our geometry of our poly object of our the object that we're emitting from. So I can change that here now to surface, and it will generate a more random emission from the surface of this object rather than from the vertices, or directional will be from each of those vertices again. Okay, so let me go with surface here. And I can do a number of things. The first thing, so that's under the Emit tab. These are the two to really play around with, just a basic emitter, or if you have an object that you want to emit particles from. The first thing I want to show you is how to create an instancer object. And for an instancer, I need my particles, and then I need geometry, more geometry. So maybe I'll use a cone, and I'm going to rotate this cone. Of course, this can be something that you've created, a model or a poly object or NURBS object that you've created yourself. Does not have to be a primitive shape, but we will use a primitive here. I'm going to scale this down a bit. And now I have my cone, and then I want to select my cone first, and then Command select my particles, and I want to go to instancer. And now at each of those particles, I've created a cone at each of those particle points. Okay. I can create multiple, and I have now here an instancer node. And so you can see that I have my P cone 1 is my selection. And I can do some fun stuff here. One thing I'll show you is perhaps make two different, I'll have a cone and then maybe a cylinder. And let me go to my instancer here, and I will remove this, and then I will select these two objects and say I want to create an instancer of 2 rather than 1. Let me delete this instancer here actually. Let me select these two, and then the particle system last, and then I will create an instancer here. And now when I go to my instancer tab, I have both at position 0 the cylinder and position 1 the cone. And right now I just have the cone is being emitted. The cylinder is being emitted because it's at position 0. But I can change that. That's because the cycle here is set to none. So it will cycle through these. I can set the cycle to sequential, and it's every frame, and it does this very weird jittery thing. But if I change that again to seconds and maybe have every 2 seconds that it changes, I have two different kinds of the objects per particle shift and change. Let's zoom out a little bit more. So you can see there's cylinders, and then there are cones, and then there's cylinders again. So now let's see what other things we can do. Something else that we can do with the shading is if I go down, I have opacity and I have color. I can apply color. to these objects. And this is going to be something similar to applying color in a mesh object and having it appear in Arnold. What I want to first do is select my two objects here, the cone and the cylinder, my original instancer objects, and I'm going to, because I can still play with the scale and things of these and it will affect the other objects. It will affect all of the instancer objects that I've duplicated to these points. So I can go to, so anything that I do to these two initial objects that I have in my scene, or any instancer objects that I have, will be applied to my particles. So I can go and create let me go to my rendering tab and put a standard surface shader here on these particles. I'm also going to add a Arnold light to the scene so that I can see my particles. I'm going to turn off my grid here too. And let me go back to my one of these objects here. They both, since I shift selected them, they both have my standard surface applied. And let me actually back up here for a second and go to my particle and particle 1 and go to color. And I'm going to set this to a, rather than, I want to set my selected color. Maybe I don't want it white, maybe I want a ramp on it. So let me go ahead and, using a ramp is just another word for gradient. So now that I have this here, I can change the color by select color down here. Maybe I'll start with green and then I'm going to end with red. Okay, and I have my ramp. Go back to my nParticles. I can jump back up. Okay, let's go here. And I have my ramp. And let's see if that will apply it or not. Oh, color input constant. Maybe I'll say based on age. And this is going to be hard to see. I will be able to see it if rather than instancer, let's go ahead to back to my rendering tab here. I have it as points. I'm going to just put it as spheres so I can see it before I have if it will let me. It's going to be hard for me to see this now that I've already added an instancer to it. But what I want to do, so if I want to see what my color looks like, I'm a little concerned about why it's not showing me my ramp. Perhaps I don't need a ramp, I just need that. Okay, scratch the ramp and adding that texture node here. I can do it directly here. So I have over the course of each particle's age, my particle color will shift from green to red. And so you can do this with its glowing qualities, its incandescence, or its opacity. But for color, there's a couple more things I need to do to be able to see this effect take place. Let me hit 4 here on my keyboard. And there's my spheres. Cool. So let me just make my spheres actually a little bit bigger. I have my instancer objects on them, but I still will be able to see it in my scene. Let me go to my particle size and up this radius. Ooh, those are way too big, but here you can see that it's been applied to the particles themselves. So to render something like this out, if I'm using spheres or that blobby surface thing, this is kind of what it looks like. There's already a material attached to those spheres, but I want to have greater control over the way this shading is applied. And I also like my instancer objects. So what I'll do, and I also would like down here says age, the input max is 1 second. So let's make it 3. And then I can also do color randomize if I'd like. And this will randomize the color. But I don't like that. I like my little gradient I've created. So I would like to output this. Let me go back here, and I'm going to turn my particle type back to points. So I can't see it. I can maybe if I hit 4 on my keyboard and see these particles and maybe their color, but they're so small, it's very hard to see them. So I want to apply that color to my instancer objects because it's fine. Again, let me reiterate that it's all right that I don't have to use an instancer, but I like my instancer objects. So I'm going to go down to my Arnold tab here, and I'm going to, under Export Attributes, type in RGB PP. So the red, green, and blue values per particle. And now, if I go to my standard surface shader that I've applied to these instancer objects, I have to, under Color, add a Arnold utility data, user data color, and under my attribute I say again RGB PP. So now in my scene, go to my shading, I don't see it applied. However, let me make sure I have that is the same, and it is. I don't see it applied, but if I go to my rendering tab, I see that that color has been applied. I still have those initial objects that I want to remove in the scene. That little black cylinder. So my 2 instancer objects, I'm going to hide those. So let me minimize this. Let me turn off their visibility. So there are other things that I can do under my particle tab here that we'll get into in the next video.